Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us. I'm Mark Nykirk. I direct the Scripps Howard Center for Civic Engagement at NKU, and we are partners with the 3 public library districts for the Northern Kentucky Forum. The Forum, which has been around for about 15 years now, is designed to have civic conversations in our community about topics facing Northern Kentucky. And we are launching today what will be a series of discussions about housing and homelessness in our community. So this is the first of more on this topic, and so thanks for being with us. I appreciate the in-person audience and welcome the virtual audience also. Sorry, virtual people, you have to have your own donuts and coffee, but if you were with us, the Dunkin' Donuts are tasty this morning. So I want to remind you of a few things upcoming. November the 10th at 9 a.m. at the Boone County Library in Burlington. Our topic will be affordable housing and its relationship to economic vitality. So put that on your calendars, and we hope to see you there. Also, on the day before that, on November the 9th at Northern Kentucky University and the College of Informatics, the forum is a partner with a presentation by Julie Pace, who is the executive editor of the Associated Press, who will be talking about the challenges for modern media. Julie is, as director of the Associated Press, really one of the leading decision makers about what is covered and what's not and how in the country. So that's a special guest to have with us. Also, the forum was a co-host with other community partners for a gubernatorial debate at Northern earlier this month, and that debate is now on our website. If you missed it or you just want to review the candidates prior to voting on November the 7th, you can go to nkyforum.org and watch that debate. We will have questions at the toward the end of this session. If you are in the virtual audience, you'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Just type your question there, and I will monitor those, and we'll get those asked of the panel. I also want to say thank you. The webcast this morning is made possible by Norse Media. Norse Media involves students who are studying electronic media broadcast, and they have been with us really since the beginning of COVID so that we could continue having forums. And it turns out that people like the hybrid model, so we're still working with Norse Media. My office at NKU works a good deal on connecting classroom opportunities to community opportunities. The Norse Media students who are with us today get this activity to learn how to set up and light and broadcast for webcasting. So it's an actual real job skill, and they'll all be employed, and we'll all have a lively video experience in the future because of this. So thank you, Norse Media, for the support of that. I get started with just some quick introductions of our panelists. We don't have name plates, so you may just have to raise your hand. Katie Kassis, raising her hand, and in the blue is the Youth Services Director for the Brighton Center, which is here in Newport. I should mention that we are at the Newport Branch of the Campbell County Public Library is where we are this morning. And the Brighton Center is a few blocks away. Jay Brewer is the Superintendent of Dayton Independent School District, just a little to the east of here, upriver, and Christy McNally is the McKinney-Vento Coordinator, which is that refers to some federal legislation that asks that all school districts have someone to deal with the issue of students who are facing challenges in having a home. So Christy works here in Newport. As we go along, they may tell you, I think we'll tell you a little more about what their jobs are like and things that they do. But to get started, I think it's interesting where we are here at the library. You can look out and you can see an interstate bridge and the underpass. And so often when we think about homelessness, we think about the people that we encounter living under those bridges in tents. But it has a different, many different dimensions. And so I think if we could just start and let's give a face to this issue. When we are talking about a child and a family that's homeless in our schools, what are we talking about? And maybe there's a kid that really stands out in your memory that's is an example of what your work is like. Christy, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. And I'm going to start with the federal law because I think that's important, which is what my position is named after, which is the federal law called McKinney-Vento. It came about in 1987, which is a long time ago, but it's really gained momentum over, I don't know, maybe the past 15 plus years. But what it means is it is a student that is lacking a fixed, adequate nighttime residence. Any of those criteria can meet for that student. So that's going to mean predominantly families that are doubled up due to housing instability, evictions, domestic violence. There's really no, those are just some examples. It's going to mean kids that might be living in shelters, hotels, transitional housing. All of those, that criteria will meet under the McKinney-Vento law, which is when a student is identified as McKinney-Vento or experiencing homelessness, which is a tricky word, homelessness. Because in our like you described, Mark, is they're not living under a bridge. Does that happen? Yes. Is that going to happen most of the time? No.
Jay, yeah, what's it look like from the perspective of the superintendent?
I wish it had a face, because then I'd be able to identify it very quickly in our hallways and say that's the face of a homeless student. But I think that's the challenge that we all have, is that there isn't a look. You know, they don't come down the hallway with their shopping cart and their tent and all the other things. Right. So for our students, they often look just like everybody else. You know, we have a number of students, you know, we've got about the data from Dayton would be, we've got about 780 students, K through 12. 60 of them have been identified as homeless. So we've got about 7% of our kids. So about 1 out of every 10 that walk by me is going to fit into that. Often I have no idea. You know, at my level, I'm in charge of everything but nothing. So I don't go around and tag, you know, students, you're homeless and that. So often it comes as a little bit of a surprise when I hear that this child's, you know, doing what she's saying, the doubling up. That's the most common experience that right. We're seeing. We call it the couch surfing. You know, for whatever reason, they're not able to get along at their home anymore. So they either choose, or it's chosen for them, that they must leave the house, and then they have to figure it out on their own. I'm going to go to this friend's house, I'm going to go to this aunt or uncle, and I'm going to surf around the community looking for the safest places that I can find. So I truly wish it had a face, so to speak, but to me it doesn't. They blend in very well, and that's part of their survival mode, is to blend in and look like everybody else. So that's part of the challenge of what we're dealing with, is identifying them to support them through this process.
Kate, the Brighton Center provides support services to these children and families. What's that look like for you?
Well, we have several different programs, but one particularly focused on our homeless youth is our emergency youth shelter housed out of Covington that serves 11 to 17-year-olds. Youth that are runaway, homeless, on the verge of becoming homeless. And when you mention, you know, thinking of a particular family or story, there's one in particular that stands out to me. We had a 17-year-old male actually call the shelter saying that he had been kicked out of the house and was living in the woods and needed a place to stay. When we brought him in, and found out a little bit more information. He actually had 3 siblings. All 3 were living with friends, different friends. So all 3 younger sisters were in different living situations. Mother was dealing with substance abuse, and they had been living with grandparents, but because of conflict, grandparents had kicked them out. And the youngest was 12. And so going to school, attending normally, but very fractured. So we were able to connect them all, but I think one of the biggest things is the 2-generation issue of our homeless youth is there's so much more besides what the youth is dealing with that goes into their situation that they have no control over. And how can we support the whole family to make sure that anything that we come up with is going to sustain and help them along the way?
Kate, if I could stay with you for just a moment. We're mainly here to talk about what this looks like in P-12 education, but the Brighton Center also has a couple of programs that this problem doesn't go away in your life just because you turn 18 and graduate. And so you have a relatively new housing initiative for, I think, 18 to 24-year-olds, and also the Scholar House in Newport, where single parents live with their children. Could you just give us a little bit of that snapshot?
Absolutely. So we opened Opportunity House just over a year ago on NKU's campus, based on years of recognizing that there is a need for that 18 and over population, that opportunity youth, of youth that either aren't going to school or aren't working and don't have the supports they need to succeed into adulthood. And so we have 16 units on site. It's youth that are able to qualify for Section 8 housing, so we provide the stable housing for them and case manage it on site. For youth that are wanting to pursue post-secondary education, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year degree or a 1-year trade certification, we're trying to break down those barriers that are causing them to not be able to succeed in the academic world. So bringing partners in, helping provide a wraparound services to help them get that education to succeed in the workforce later on.
Thank you. Christy, if I could go to you, kind of intrigued, the discussion as we started was you don't always know a student who's experiencing homelessness looks like the student in the next seat, and I suppose that's really, there's a benefit to that because you don't want to have a stigma associated with the child. But could you just talk a little bit about that challenge? You need to know who they are so you can support, and at the same time you don't want to single them out among their peers. I mean, that seems like that would be a daily challenge.
Yeah, it is. I think kids are pretty cool, and the way that they exist on a day-to-day basis never ceases to amaze me. It is what keeps me doing the job that I do, to be honest. There's such beauty, to be honest, in student homelessness because kids are freaking rock stars. And, I always say that these are little people with big people problems. And, and I also say, I'm going to give you all my little taglines here real quick, and that is, we got kids walking around in the best shoes and their hair's just on point. And I always say that, you can hide what happened to you last night, but you can't hide your feet, right? Because people have that stigma. Well, look at those shoes. I'm specifically looking at this gentleman's shoes right there because those are some good shoes, okay? And that's how kids are going to walk through the halls, exactly like that, with those black and white Nikes. And they're going to walk real stiff a lot of times because they're not going to have any creases in their shoes. It's very important. But that's just what normal kids do. And I think us adults can really relate too, because sometimes we do things like that too because we don't want to stand out for whatever reason. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I get caught on stuff and I just go with it. But if you are in a school building, you never will know. You really will never know. But like you said, it is important to identify. And it's important because that surface level may be just fine, but what's happening deep down in here and deep up in here, that's a big deal. They may not be performing very well, but on the flip side, they also may be performing very well. And if you can identify that student, know the backstory, then you put the proper services in place, which is exactly why McKinney-Vento came into place in the first place, was that to ensure and make sure that students' rights were being just like anyone else's students'
Drill down a little
rights.
bit on the specifics of that. So a student, however you may discover that a student is experiencing homelessness, what happens, what's your action steps from there to have interaction with the student, and what support services are typically useful and needed?
Yeah, the biggest thing is making sure that the student and the family knows their rights. That's the one. And those rights are going to be that they have the right to remain in their school of origin no matter what is happening. So if they have to move from Newport and move into Dayton for a period of time, they have the right to stay in Newport schools, or vice versa. This is a whole United States thing. This is not just a Newport Dayton issue. This is across the board in every public school. Someone just like me identified to make sure that kids' rights are being protected and put into place. So one is ensuring their rights, knowing that they have the right to stay here no matter what's going to happen, that we're not going to worry about housing. You're going to focus right here. You worry about the housing, I'll worry about the education. Then if we need to provide transportation, another huge, huge piece in schools is transportation. Very costly, very time consuming, and that's what a big people brain needs to worry about, not a kid. And then making sure that any services that they may need, is there extra tutoring that needs to be done? Are they in the right classes? Are they in the right career path? Are they, all of those things, are they now have this extra little silent person on the side, just making sure that those things are happening for them?
So Jay, and really all of you, you mentioned, you used the word couch surfing, and that just has in it mobility, and Christy, you're talking about the right to stay in a particular in the school of origin. But if you're say with some relatives in Newport and you have a stable, good experience in the Newport school district,
Which you will.
and then you next are living with relatives in, say, rural Boone County, you're a long way from Newport. I mean, what is the and that disruption of moving from one school district to another is significant, right? So does that, even though the law says you get to stay, do they stay, or is are you moving from district to district?
Oh, they absolutely stay.
Yep.
And that's where collaboration and coordination between school systems to figure out how to get the transportation for these students. And I hear my director of transportation on the phone often trying to resolve those situations of how do we get a student from A to B to C to D. And for example, one district may transport to and the other district may transport from, just trying to figure out those different type of resources that are necessary to do that, because we're somewhat limited on how many buses and vans and different things that we have to be able to get kids there. So sometimes it's just a matter of we don't have those resources available, and then trying to drill down how can we do that. And I've seen vouchers for Uber, taxis. I mean, it gets a real problem-solving dynamic when it comes to trying to get these students to give them that one stable and constant environment in their life, which is really critical, that they know each and every day I'm going back to Newport schools or Dayton schools where people know my name. I know the kids there, and I know those types of things. So it's often just life critical for those kids to have that consistency of the school system.
Kate, there's been mention of support services once a student is identified. Are these calls that the Brighton Center fields from the schools to provide some of those support services, and what are the needs?
So it depends on the situation. We get plenty of calls from our McKinney-Vento partners, and all of the schools have been great partners with us. If a youth in particular doesn't have a place where they feel safe to stay, we've gotten calls of kids crashing in abandoned houses. So they'll reach out to us to see if we're able to house that youth until they're able to get connected to wherever they might be able to stay long term. And once they're housed within our shelter, we have an on-site case manager and counselor to work with the youth and try and connect them and their families to any additional resources they may need. Inside of our building, we also have our street outreach program, and they work with 16 to 21-year-olds that are either homeless or on the verge of becoming homeless. And so occasionally we'll get youth that are referred to the shelter that just don't feel comfortable coming to the shelter, and that's understandable. They'd rather stay with their friends that they're comfortable with and what they know. But if they're over 18 or in that transition, then our staff within Street Outreach can provide additional case management services, again, connecting them to wherever we can find to help the family, help that youth get to where they need to be, provide support for finding jobs or documents. A lot of our homeless youth don't have their documents that they need, so whether it's IDs, birth certificates that are barriers to getting work and other things. So our services help to fill those gaps when we can.
You used a phrase, and I'm going to just open this question up to the whole panel. You can, one of you talk about it or all of it, but crashing in an abandoned house, that's kind of chilling to hear, frankly. And I know, circumstances vary from child to child, but what's actually happening there? Is a child being sent away or fleeing parents or guardians or, an abandoned house? Paint us a better picture of what that means and looks like. It sounds so horrible.
Yeah, I've had that situation happen, and I think most of the time it's going to, and I'm not saying this is all the time, so please know that, but a lot of times it's going to be conflict between the adult and the child, or there's going to be some drug use, alcohol abuse, just a lot of contention within the home, and personalities are not matching up, those kinds of things, and then they either kick the child out or the child leaves. And then sometimes they may not sleep in that abandoned building, but they will keep their stuff in that abandoned building, and they'll find a place to sleep at night. And again, sometimes they are sleeping in that, but in the case that I'm referring to, the child was leaving her stuff in the building, but finding places to sleep at night. But that was her hub, and she was keeping that on the down low for a period of time until she was able. We built. The key to this job and the key to this business in general is about building relationships and building trust, and it takes time. And sometimes you have to let things just go and slowly peel the onion layers back, and then you learn more, such as, I'm keeping my stuff in this abandoned building, or yes, I did have to sleep in this other abandoned building over in Covington for a period of time. But you got to build up to get there. It takes some time.
I'll add to that. I think the problem with teenage homelessness is an echo of what's going on within the family. For a child to go sleep in an abandoned house, things got to be pretty tough at home to make that decision, and then to survive one night in an abandoned house and say, okay, that's enough for me, I'm going back home or I'm going somewhere else. The fear of going back to that home has to tell us what is going on inside that home that they're so afraid to go back into it. Some of the readings that I've done, a lot of it, or some of it, probably less than, I've got a stat, about 40% go around gender identity, sexual identity issues, which flow into mental health issues. They're not being accepted at home, so they're either forced out of the home or they choose to leave a home that they're not accepted in. can be a real challenge for them. So again, I really feel like it's an echo of what's going on inside the house. You know, the more that we can strengthen our communities and strengthen our families, the better off these kids are going to be. We see it more with our teenage population than we do with our younger kids. I remember somebody telling me once that Mother Nature has a wonderful way of, I've got 3 older kids myself. We know teenage years can be challenging, and they say there's a reason for that they can be a little bit challenging, so that when they finally leave the nest, you're like, thank God they're out of the house type of a feeling, so you're not crying when they leave because they've been on your last nerve. But we know there's a different extreme of, okay, they're 18, I'm glad they're out on their own, than the child saying, I can't live in this environment where I'm not accepted, where I'm not loved, where I'm not valued, or where I'm not abused or neglected. So again, it's the echo of what's going on inside of that house.
Yeah, they touched on a lot of issues that do come up in a variety of ways. Whether it's substance abuse, families that are incarcerated, we have grandparents that are taking care of children, but then it's also, families that are together but are struggling with the housing issue, and we might have a mother that has a Section 8 voucher, and she's got 3 or 4 kids, and she can't find a 3-bedroom place that accepts her voucher, and so she's struggling to find something maybe for the little ones, where the teenager is kind of left to fend for themselves just because they don't have the resources, and it's not necessarily of any fault of their own, just struggling to manage the system and what's available within housing as well.
Kate, you mentioned grandparents raising children, and in one of the recent gubernatorial debates, it was observed that Kentucky has a particularly high number. That's, I think, a relatively new measure in the census. And having looked at those numbers from time to time, I see those in our community, and then I heard on this debate that it's statewide. I don't get too far afield here, but just what does that look like in real life, and why is that number so high?
I think some of it is related to the substance abuse history that we've had recently, parents that are incarcerated, just different struggles within the time for adults now. And so trying to find housing for these youth, family that can be with them. But, some of these grandparents are having to go back, and it might not be grandparents, it could be aunts, uncles, or family friends as well. So they're having to adjust to having a child again, doing that raising of a teenager or a young child. And, it's difficult, and you're dealing with obviously youth that are having mental struggles with the chaos that they've been in their life, and so that presents its own challenge. So managing those and finding appropriate resources for whether it's mental health or supports for parenting skills, I think it's just a difficult time, if it's even for parents that have their own children, but let alone if you're taking in someone else's, it's even more of a struggle.
Other thoughts on that, the circumstance of kids being in with their grandparents? Or?
I think Kate hit on it really well. There's many stories that go along as to why the grandparents taking over, and it's a history and it's a cycle. That's pretty much what we've seen, is that cycle.
I wonder, in this short amount of time, we've heard some pretty distressing stories, and kids living in abandoned buildings, alienated from their family, trying to fit in. And I know you all, from a daily standpoint, know this in even more detail, but we've been with you for less than a half an hour, and it's distressing.
Everyone's probably feeling very depressed right now.
How does this work out? Are the children resilient? Are there success stories? What do you... You're committed to, you have this passion for the work because of the need is there, and but how's it play out?
I can speak for how it plays out in Newport, and we're lucky. We're a small district. We're very intentional. We're very focused. We have the ability to do that based on our size. So please know that I'm coming from that angle. Recently, we just did some data, and our students that are identified as McKinney-Vento are performing at level, if not higher, than their unhoused peers. That says a lot. There's a stigma, which is what we've talked about, that students that are experiencing, homelessness or identified as McKinney-Vento, that doesn't happen, that they're going to be your biggest behavior problem, that they're going to be your lowest performer. And so recently this data is showing, no, that's not true. It's not. I think it's all about how your district views that. I think it's the lens in which they are looking at maybe the person in charge of the program. I don't know. There's many factors into place, but if you are intentional, you're building relationships, these children are not going to fall through the cracks, and they're going to rise up. And we see that over and over and over again. They're going to be your valedictorian. They're going to be the best athlete. They're going to be the star in the play. They're going to go up 10 extra points in their MAP scores. I mean, it's happening on the regular. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Chrissy, if I could, we had a panel once at NKU with students who had come out of very difficult family situations, and I think there are about 4 students in the recurring theme from what those students told us is that regardless of very often the parents had drug problems, but they had hopes for their children. And as disturbing as those family circumstances were, each of those students, NKU students, talked about something their parents had instilled in them, which was, I'm not quite sure how to articulate it, do better than I do, a hope for the next generation. Do you all see that? I wondered if I was seeing a statistically insignificant cohort, or if that's an actual thing in the population at large of parents whose lives didn't go well, wishing for something better for their children, and their children knowing that.
Yeah. I believe that. I believe that people are innately good. I believe that when they had children, they've never said, you know what, this is what I want to happen to my kid. No way. Never. Everyone's doing the best they can with what they know. And I think that those statements that those students said to you are very true. Absolutely. Is that said often enough? Probably not. When we work with our families, we're not just working with our students, we're also working with our families. And my job is to say, you know what, you're a really good mom. Because guess what? She's not feeling like a really good mom. Not at all. Because last night they had to stay in a hotel, right? That would make me not feel like a good mom. So it's all about building people up. And I think parents want the same thing. They just want the best for their kid. They want the best for the kid. That's just automatic. That's my opinion.
Jay, Kate, thoughts on that?
From my level, I think one of the most important things that's come to light for me is just the stability and the people providing the services in our community. At Dayton, we've got a homeless coordinator who's been with us for a number of years now. We've got our family resource folks that have been with us for a number of years, and establishing that base of trust. And what we know is that the community has to trust you, that I'm getting involved with your family, and I'm not trying to report you to social services. I'm not trying to take your kids away. So that's a first barrier that needs to be overcome when working with the families and working with the kids, that we're not here to do harm. We're here to do help. And that takes folks within our school systems who are established. It takes months, if not years, to build that trust within your school system. And then really to develop that our folks, when they see new kids come into our school district, spot them and start making those relationships with them, and then identifying if there are needs to be addressed at that point. But we certainly have seen kids overcome this. Sometimes what you'll see is that it'll build resiliency in kids. It's like, heck, if I can overcome this, going to college and getting a job's the easiest part of my day.
Right.
So it can build that up, but it can also crush kids. We had 5 out of 60 seniors last year identified as homelessness. I know that 3 of the 5 are currently in continuing education at the university level. So again, you can see them rise above it, but you can also see them be crushed by this. Again, the mental health. I stumbled upon a term I was unfamiliar with until I did a little bit of research on this. It's called survival sex. Where, and she's nodding her head, okay, that's not a good nod that I want to hear from her. My understanding of that is when this couch surfing can become dangerous. You're going into multiple homes, you could be exposed to drugs, you could be coerced into saying, hey, if you're going to live in this home, I'm going to need sex back from you. And the data I'm seeing, it's 1 out of every 3 homeless teenagers are a victim of survival sex. And we all just shake our head and say, holy fright, now here comes a new monster from out underneath the bed that we have to deal with in this circumstance. So, you were shaking your head to that. You may be able to speak to that more than I can. But I guess my 2 points is, from the superintendent level, we need funding for these programs to be able to keep these folks in the jobs that they do. I don't need turnover of these family resource coordinators, these homeless coordinators, because they seek out other jobs that are paying more. So I'll kick it back to you if you want to talk about the other part.
About whether I want more money or not?
More money, which would be great.
I'm kidding. No, I don't. We don't do this job for the money. You know that. Nobody in education does it for the. No, I know.
Bills.
That's right. We got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
We got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
I did have a thought, Jay, while you were talking, and then I got distracted by money.
Money.
Well,
But,
let me,
yeah, go ahead.
We do have a question. I'll remind the virtual audience, if you have a question, type it in the Q&A, and we'll get more generally to questions here momentarily. But given that the money topic has come up, let me give you a question from the virtual audience who sent me a link to a story about $114 million for a new correctional institute. I'm sorry, I don't have time to read that right now, but we'll stipulate that there is a big new Kentucky expenditure on expansion of a corrections. And so his question is, is that where we want to invest our money on that end? Or are we investing enough on the front end to address these concerns? What are, it's just kind of an open-ended question. What do we need? We're about to have a Kentucky General Assembly open in January, and allocating money to needs will be a discussion. And what are the, Jay, you may have particular insight in this. What are the fiscal challenges? But
Yeah, I mean, it goes everywhere from the mental health to the family resource coordinators to vouchers for transportation to help families keeping the light, the heat, all those types of things going on. My response to the correctional facilities is that's apples to oranges when you're talking about the homeless population. We certainly have a group of students that need some type of correctional facility because of the behaviors that they choose. I'm going to say, by and large, what I see in our homelessness population, that isn't the case. With those students. It can be, but I don't see, beefing up our correctional facilities and sending our homeless kids into those as being the answer for those, because often, the challenge for a lot of these kids, once they start this doubling up in the surfing, drug addiction increases, sexual activity increases, all those things. So trying to get to that prevention point, which is what our family resource coordinators do and our homeless coordinators do, trying to get them to limit that time that they're doubling up or couch surfing, and having the resources to strengthen our communities is going to be the key way to address that.
I don't want to misconstrue the question, because I think the implication of it was
because I
more.
think,
Is this where we want to spend our money?
Right. Is this where
priorities?
Sure. And this is where I'm going to go from that question, and that is that when you feel better, you do better. And so I believe that people are attached to a feeling in everything that they do. So when a student, when an adult, when anyone is not feeling well about whatever, whether it's a mental health, whether it's just you feel like a piece of crap because of decisions that have been a cycle that you just keep making, then you just keep making bad decisions. And hence you just keep making worse decisions and worse decisions, hence a correctional facility, right? So if we were to focus financially on the front end, so when kids come into that school over there, they sure as hell better feel good about being there. That is my biggest thing, that when they are in those buildings, They feel good, they feel safe, they feel taken care of, they feel smarter. Because when they have that feeling, they're going to do better. And then with their parent, I'm going to keep saying, you are a good parent. Sometimes I'm like, oh, they're not a good parent. But they are. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes your parents are doing this survival sex. All these things are happening in these people's lives. And imagine what that feels like. So if we can start focusing on that and focusing on that front thing and building people up, building students up, building their families up, we're not going to need those correctional facilities or just very small ones, you know?
Jay, there's something I've heard you say in the past that I think may be relevant to this, and is strong communities make strong schools. And I think, Chrissy, what you're talking about is investing in strong communities. Maybe you could reflect on that a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that is an answer, housing stability. One of my concerns right now is the housing market, rents going up. We're seeing that turnover in Dayton. I know Newport has seen that buildings being turned over that they used to be able to rent for $800, $900 a month are now $1,600, $1,700 a month. People are being priced out of that and then forced into the double up situations. I know of situations where families, that you go to families who are also teetering on the edge, so when you go to them, a scenario might be, hey Jay, I can take your 3 kids, but I can't take you. And you can stay out front and live in your car in front of my house. Okay, again, not a very common scenario. So again, if we can find that affordable housing that they can stay in, livable wages for the jobs that they have. So a big part of that, again, that's where you go back to strengthening communities, the continuing education component to get to those jobs that will provide that security for them, I all think are a piece of lifting that community to lift our kids.
Kate, see if I can bring this narrative along without being too windy about it, but the Brighton Center, which is a little over 50 years old, started, as I understand it, as services to ex-coal miners who came to Newport often to work in the steel mill, and the Brighton Center began to create those support services, and then the families were coming and staying, and next thing you know, you needed recreational things, and so now here we are 50-plus years later with this community organization that tries to build those stronger communities. Where are we now in terms of needs? You mentioned the housing at NKU, so you must be always assessing what's the need to make this community stronger and get people on their feet. What's that look like right now?
Well, I mean, they definitely touched on the key area that we're focused on with housing situation in the region. So definitely looking into that, how can we support the community in that way? Another area, I think particularly for our youth, that's kind of hitting in the region, and there's a few different groups looking at that, is mental health and how that focuses on, impacts youth and their families. So you talked about funding as well, and I think the research has been on prevention and the impact that makes and the difference as far as getting in early, having programs. Now we have to have the funding and the policies to catch up with the research that's showing us that prevention programs and other opportunities are going to help our families and help our youth. So there's definitely, people working together and talking now and trying to come up with solutions both on the mental health aspect and housing to figure out, how can we all work together? How can we drive towards the same direction and make sure that we're going to make our communities stronger in the most effective way possible?
I have a little bit of a speed round here because I note that we need to get to questions here pretty quickly, but without identifying who, I'm going to tell you that before we started, I was asked not to ask any number questions. But I didn't promise to abide by that request. There was a story recently in the Lexington newspaper about a study of the scope of this situation in Fayette County, and if you put Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County together, we're talking about an area roughly the same size, although the difference is Fayette County has a single school district, and I think there were just under 500 students who'd been identified as in this category of being homeless in some fashion. What's the scale of this look like in our community, and is this, the stereotype might be that this is a problem that exists only in the River City districts. Is it all over Northern Kentucky or confined to the Newports and Daytons and Covingtons? Scale and where do you find this?
Well, I don't know the specific numbers, but I know in doing research for different grant applications, in every community that we serve, which is the 8 counties in Northern Kentucky, each school district had at least one homeless youth identified. So it's not just located in one particular area.
Jay, you interacted with a lot of the other superintendents. Do you all talk about this and everybody sees it, or?
Yeah. It's in every school district. I think it's going to be a little bit more prevalent in certain school districts. I think economics plays a part in it, but it's certainly everywhere. Again, it has no face, it has no look. It may be even more challenging in certain districts to overcome it because you're trying to fit in at a different level than where other students are trying to fit in.
But Christy, all of our districts have a U, right?
Every public school district. I'm going to tread lightly on this question since I get very fired up about this question. Every public school in the United States has someone identified as a McKinney-Vento coordinator. It is by law that position must exist, and then that the job happens, okay? With that being said, I don't think that would have ever occurred if this was just a Kentucky issue, a Newport issue, whatever. I think in an odd sort of way, with this lack of affordable housing that is occurring more and more nowadays, it's starting to shine light. Oh, this isn't just a Newport, Covington, thing. This is across the board. One really cool thing that has come about this in my work in this job in 10 years is there is the Northern Kentucky Homeless Education Collaborative, which is made up of Boone, Kenton, Campbell, Covington, Dayton, Southgate, Newport, and that's all these districts in the Northern Kentucky region working together on this issue, making sure that we are, if a student crosses the line, it's now our student. It's not just my student, it's our student. And we're working together on this issue. And it's not even an issue. I don't like using that word. Sometimes you're just trained to use those words, and that's not right. But, it's not just in Northern Kentucky. The thing is I'm willing to talk about it all the time. And so I get a lot of attention around Newport homelessness. But it's not to break, I get passionate about it, so we're going to keep talking about it. And I hope that other people join my team and keep talking about it with me, because it's not just a Newport thing, or these little districts along the river. It's everywhere. But that's okay that it's everywhere, Mark, okay? Remember that. It's okay. Just because you have homeless students in your school does not mean you're not a good school.
So one of the reasons that the Forum Board wanted to take on this topic is for exactly, Christy, what you're saying, is to shed some light on what this looks like. Anytime we talk about public affairs, and I'm going to use the word issue for a moment, and we're an audience passively listening, most of us at some point during such a conversation say, okay, that's great, what can I do? I wonder if the panelists have some advice for us on what, other than care about it, is there action, or what could we do?
I think when that question comes up a lot, it's a tough one. One is, I would say if it's ever a monetary thing, you donate directly to your McKinney-Vento program. Money goes straight there. It allows coordinators to be able to do things for students that they couldn't otherwise maybe do. I think asking questions, being curious, not in a nosy sort of curious way, but a curious way of like, what does this really mean? Talking about it more, volunteering your time to spend time in the schools, that's a big one. Schools need help. They need extra assistance in all kinds of ways. That's a huge piece as well. Spending time in your district's schools.
I think it goes back to the premise, if you see something, say something, you know, and it depends on your role. You know, my role as superintendent, you know, there are different things that I can do than the manager at our local Kroger, who can do some wonderful things just by having an awareness that a number of their employees probably are experiencing this, doubling up this surfing situation, and working with them on scheduling, working with them on advances within the company and those types of things. Down to the community bus driver who notices people in and out of routes, the Uber driver, so, you know, can do a lot of different things to provide that little boost, that wind in their sails that they might need to get to the next day that leads them on to the next thing. So I think we can all do something, but I think the awareness part is the first step.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would second awareness, definitely, and destigmatizing the issue, you know, homelessness and families. And going back to strong communities, we can't create a strong community if not everyone on the community is on board.
Absolutely.
And so making sure that we're engaging with each other and supporting your neighbor and interacting with your neighbor and making sure that everyone is moving forward in the same direction and not against progress and support of these families.
Questions from the audience? Yeah.
I appreciate you all being here. One of the things that I would love to hear is the support services that you have for students is amazing. But what I know you all have really wonderful proactive things that you're doing in programming to prevent this issue from occurring, and I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the proactive programs that you're doing for students.
So just in case, I'm not sure if the virtual audience hears you or not, but essentially the question is, what are the preventative programming that's in place to help with this?
And I think that I'm going to ask back, is it to the prevention of preventing homelessness or of preventing?
Both.
Both.
Both. What supports that you all are doing proactively for families and for students to steer the ship in a direction that would avoid homelessness?
Sure. I think what I can speak from on the school level, and I'll go back to what I said about if you know better, you do better. And that can be academically, emotionally, spiritually, physically. So in terms of all of those levels, making sure that students are getting what academic needs they need. Physically, are they able to participate in sports? Because that's a huge piece too, and sometimes that can't happen. But we sure as heck are going to make that happen. Emotionally, we're going to offer programs all around that. You know, social emotional learning, that's happening now within the school day, and it's going to happen in your after-school programs as well, tapping into that. And even spiritually, you know, that stuff happens kind of organically. And I don't mean religiously, I mean spiritually.
I'll say probably the best example, we have our elementary school principal, her mantra is you have to know them to grow them. And she's put together a wonderful process of anytime a new family comes to our school district, they are required to have what we call a welcome visit, where they come in and sit down with our team, and the team can be the principal or the assistant principal, guidance counselor, mental health therapist, family resource, so 3 or 4 people, and it gives them a chance to tell their story and tell us about their child. So it prevents what, you know, I did in my misspent principal youth. Sometimes you have a family come in, hey, we're new to your district. All right, second grader, Kate, you're going to go down to Miss Howe's room, and you walk her down to Miss Howe's like, I don't even have a desk for this kid, but I'm going to put on a face like I like them. And we have no idea what she's been doing, if she's going to run around the room with scissors or if she's going to get a 36 on the ACT. So my point is trying to slow the process down on the onboarding part, building that trust with families families from the very beginning. So any new student to our district will go through what we call that welcome visit, and that time to get to allow the parents to tell the story, which is then communicated out to the teachers that they'll be working with. And then we've expanded our conference days, so to speak, for family engagement. So before we start the school year, every child gets a 30-minute one-on-one with their teacher as well, with the parent in the room. So we're trying to do a lot of proactive things on the front end, again, to hear the stories, which eventually leads to trust. You know, and that's a big part of this whole situation, is trust and vulnerability on both ends.
We had another question. Yes.
I know that I work with Christy as a collaborative member, but will you explain, Christy, why it's important, even though most of our populations are living doubled up, why, even though they have a roof over their head, why that is important to identify those families? Because I think some people may not understand that.
So, and that kind of takes us back to the doubled up and the bouncing around. The whole point of this is to create stability. And when you're stable, it just starts a nice little cycle of success, is stability. So even though, so for instance, when I was a kid, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't really know that I was a McKinney-Vento kid, and I would never say this like McKinney-Vento kid in real life, okay? So I'm going to say it right here, okay? But anyways, I didn't even know that that was me growing up, and I didn't even know it until 2 years ago when I was doing a presentation, and I started digging deep, and I was like, oh my God, that was me. But what was happening in my childhood was my parents, my dad was incarcerated for a period of time. That took me to a grandparent's home. During that time, whatever, my mom remarries. I now live in a different home. They divorce. I now live in a different home. But they weren't my homes in those transitions, right? But if you would have looked at us, my mom owned her own business. We did pretty well in school. I did cry a lot. Ding, ding, ding. But you know what I'm saying? Because those things were happening in my life that I didn't even know were big issues. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is if someone knew a little bit more, some things could have maybe come into my life during that time during school to help me create whatever it is I needed to give me that extra help, because I had a lot of stuff going on back here, right? But about that stability piece, not having to go to a different school or not, all of that. That's what's important, is staying put, no matter what.
I'll tag on that. I often say for our kids, the staying put part is we've all played catchers or tag. And a lot of our kids are playing tag in real life or catchers, and there's never a home base. So if you play that game and there's no place you can go back to and hang on to and catch your breath and feel like, okay, I'm safe for a minute, then I'm going to run back around out there, anxiety levels just go through the roof. And that's what a lot of our kids are doing right now, is they're playing tag and there's no home base for them. So it brings out all that underlying stress. When I hear you speak, I think about what the research tells us about the importance of sleep and learning, and what these kids aren't getting a complete 8 to 10 hours of consistent sleep over time, and what that does to the brain development and retention of learning. Could go on and on and on about the undercurrent of what happens when you do this doubling up and this couch surfing. So.
And they are just
please go ahead.
Just to add, they're just an argument away from not being in a safe environment and under a roof.
Yeah.
So any situation could rise up where they're no longer there, and they're scrambling again.
We have a virtual question, Jay, that this may be best directed to you, and it has to do with when you all were discussing earlier transportation cost, and a child moves out of one district but can stay in the existing district. Is that funded, the transportation costs, is there a cost-sharing component to that, to where the child lives now, or does that fall on your district exclusively?
A lot of times we collaborate on that, and Christy will say that, and it really takes a partnership on that.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's definitely a cost-sharing piece. It's a very, like I said, it's a very expensive piece. And it is by law the two districts' responsibility to work together, pay for that, share that cost, coordinate it, make sure that it happens.
Well, I know this could go on for a while. I still have some questions I haven't gotten to, and you probably have some on your mind too, but we're out of time. And I think what we've seen in addition to getting more clarity about the issue is the tremendous amount of passion and love that our panelists have for the work that they do, and we thank you all for sharing. Please, let's say thank you. I remind everybody that the forum will stay on this topic of housing affordability and homelessness in future events, including on November the 10th. And if you're at did I get the 3 W's right there? Anyway, nkyforum.org, you can keep track of what's coming up, and we're on Facebook as well. So thanks for being with us. If there's donuts left, have one on your way out, and this will be posted as a YouTube video that you can watch and share. Please share it with friends who couldn't be with us. Thanks, everyone.